Your Toyota is quietly destroying itself right now, and you can't hear it happening. The worst part, the engineers built it this way on purpose. Today, we're exposing 5 hidden Toyota settings that lead to oil burning, excessive starter wear, and transmission stress that compounds over time. Setting number 4 triggers thousands of engine restarts you never notice. And setting number 5 has been doubling your engine's workload for years without you realizing it. Stick around because every one of these can be disabled in under 5 minutes if you know where to look. Number 1. Toyota's automatic stop-start system. If you are driving a newer Toyota, there is a feature working in the background that most owners barely think about, but it is quietly adding wear every single day. Toyota calls it automatic stop-start, and it is now standard on many late-model Toyotas, including sedans, SUVs, and even some trucks. Every time you roll up to a stoplight, pause in traffic, or come to a complete stop, the engine shuts off. The moment you lift your foot or touch the accelerator, it fires back up again like nothing happened. On paper, this sounds harmless. Toyota engineers designed the system to reduce emissions and improve fuel economy during idle time. And yes, in controlled testing, it does exactly that. But real-world driving is not a laboratory. In everyday use, this system can cause your engine to restart dozens of times in a single commute. And most drivers do not even notice how often it is happening. Here is the problem. Every engine restart is one of the most stressful moments in an engine's life. When your Toyota shuts off, oil pressure drops. When it restarts, there is a brief moment before full oil pressure is restored, where metal components are not fully separated by an oil film. That moment is called boundary lubrication, and it is where the majority of engine wear occurs. It does not matter how advanced the engine is or how good the oil is. Physics does not change. Metal touching metal, even briefly, causes wear. Now multiply that moment by 20, 30, sometimes even 50 restarts a day. Over weeks, months, and years, those extra cycles add up. Toyota does reinforce starters and batteries to handle the increased workload, but that does not mean the wear disappears. It just means the components are working harder, more often, for the same result. Starters cycle more, batteries discharge and recharge more frequently, engine mounts experience more shock loads, and internal engine components are exposed to far more dry start events than they ever were in older Toyotas that simply idled at a stoplight. If you live in a cold climate, the effects are even worse. Cold oil takes longer to build pressure, which extends that metal-to-metal window on every restart. Short trips make it worse still, because the engine never fully warms up. Moisture does not evaporate from the oil, and condensation builds in the exhaust. Over time, that combination quietly accelerates wear and corrosion in ways you will not see on the dashboard. The most frustrating part is that Toyota enables this system by default, and on many models it resets itself every single time you start the vehicle. That means even if you turned it off yesterday, it is back on today unless you manually disable it again. This is not an accident. It is done to meet emissions regulations and fuel economy targets, not to maximize long-term mechanical life. Automatic stop-start is not going to destroy your Toyota tomorrow. But if your goal is what Toyota used to be famous for, simple, durable engines that run for hundreds of thousands of miles, this system works against that philosophy. Reliability-focused owners often disable it at the start of every drive, especially in traffic, during short trips, or when the vehicle is under load. You might give up a fraction of a mile per gallon, but you dramatically reduce the number of unnecessary restarts your engine has to survive over its lifetime. And this is just the first setting. While stop-start adds wear you can feel, the next system we are going to talk about is doing damage in a way most Toyota owners never even realize. Number 2. Toyota's aggressive fuel economy tuning and transmission behavior. This is one of the most important changes in modern Toyotas. Toyota's reputation for reliability did not come from chasing the highest fuel economy numbers at all costs. It came from simple engines, conservative tuning, and drivetrains that were not constantly pushed to their limits. But modern Toyotas play a very different game, and one of the biggest changes is how aggressively the engine and transmission are programmed to chase low RPM and early upshifts. If you drive a newer Toyota with an automatic transmission or a continuously variable transmission, pay close attention to how it behaves under light throttle. The vehicle rushes into the highest possible gear as quickly as it can. At low speeds, it keeps engine RPM extremely low. On paper, this looks efficient. Lower RPM equals lower fuel consumption and better emissions numbers. But mechanically, there is a downside most owners never think about. Engines do not like being lugged. Lugging happens when the engine is forced to operate at very low RPM under load, especially in higher gears. When that happens, internal pressures increase, combustion forces become uneven, and components like bearings, connecting rods, and crankshafts are stressed harder than they would be at a slightly higher RPM. The engine sounds quiet and calm, but internally it is working harder than you realize. Toyota programs many of its modern transmissions to live in this low RPM high gear zone as much as possible. Around town, the transmission hesitates to downshift. On mild inclines, it resists dropping a gear. During gentle acceleration, it often feels sluggish or delayed, not because the engine lacks power, but because the software is prioritizing fuel economy over mechanical comfort. Over tens of thousands of miles, that constant lugging adds unnecessary strain to the engine. With continuously variable transmissions, the issue is slightly different, but just as concerning. The software constantly adjusts ratios to keep RPM low, even when the vehicle would be better off spinning slightly faster. When the transmission is forced to hold high ratios under load, belt or chain tension increases, fluid temperature rises, and internal wear accelerates. Heat is the enemy of any transmission, and this driving behavior quietly generates more of it. The situation gets worse when multiple drivers use the same vehicle. Stop-and-go traffic, inconsistent throttle habits, short trips, and occasional hard acceleration teach the transmission conflicting behaviors. The system adapts, but not always in a healthy way. Over time, drivers notice hesitation, shuddering, delayed downshifts, or a rubber band feeling during acceleration. Those are not just annoyances. They are signs the drivetrain is being stressed in ways it was not originally meant to tolerate long-term. Toyota does not call this a problem. From a regulatory standpoint, it is a success. The vehicle meets emissions targets and posts great fuel economy numbers. But if your goal is longevity, this tuning choice is quietly working against you. Reliability-focused owners often counteract this by being intentional with how they drive and how they configure the vehicle. Avoid constant eco modes, allow the engine to rev naturally instead of feathering the throttle, and make sure the transmission downshifts when it should. Those changes reduce long-term stress. In some cases, simply switching drive modes or changing driving habits dramatically improves how hard the drivetrain has to work every day. This is not something Toyota warns you about, and it is not in the owner's manual. Over hundreds of thousands of miles, the difference between an engine that is constantly lugged and one that is allowed to operate comfortably is the difference between a drivetrain that feels tight and smooth, and one that slowly wears itself out long before it should. And the next setting we are about to cover takes this problem even further, because it directly affects how often critical engine components are lubricated, or not, during everyday driving. 3. Toyota's extended oil change intervals and the lifetime oil illusion. Toyota built its reputation on engines that could survive abuse, neglect, and high mileage with very little complaint. But modern Toyotas operate under a very different maintenance philosophy than the ones that earned that legendary status. One of the most damaging shifts is how long Toyota now encourages owners to run their engine oil before changing it. And the danger is not a faulty part or a broken sensor. It is a recommendation that sounds reasonable, looks official, and quietly shortens engine life over time. Many modern Toyotas now advertise oil change intervals of 10,000 miles or 1 year, especially for vehicles using synthetic oil. For the average owner, that sounds like progress. Fewer oil changes, lower maintenance costs, and the reassurance that Toyota engineers know best. The problem is that these intervals are designed around ideal conditions, not real-world driving. Modern Toyota engines operate very differently than older designs. They run tighter tolerances, higher compression ratios, and more complex valve timing systems. Many use direct injection, or a combination of direct and port injection, which exposes the oil to more fuel dilution and contamination. Short trips, cold starts, idling, stop-and-go traffic, and frequent start-stop cycles all degrade oil far faster than most owners realize. When oil stays in the engine too long, it does not just get dirty, it breaks down. The additives that control wear, neutralize acids, and keep contaminants in suspension slowly get consumed. As that happens, the oil thickens, oxidizes, and loses its ability to protect critical components. Sludge and varnish begin forming in places you cannot see, like small oil passages, piston rings, and variable valve timing components. Toyota's variable valve timing systems rely on clean, free-flowing oil to operate correctly. When oil starts to degrade, these systems become sluggish or inconsistent. The engine may still run smoothly, but timing adjustments become less precise. Efficiency drops, and internal wear increases. Over time, sticky components can lead to rough starts, hesitation, increased oil consumption, and expensive repairs that seem to come out of nowhere. The most dangerous part is that nothing warns you. The engine does not knock. The dashboard does not light up. The car still feels fine. Oil-related damage is slow and quiet and cumulative. By the time symptoms appear, the wear has already been happening for tens of thousands of miles. Toyota's long intervals are not designed to maximize engine lifespan. They are designed to reduce perceived ownership costs, improve environmental metrics, and make new vehicles more appealing to lease customers who will not keep the car long-term. That does not mean the engines are bad. It means the maintenance strategy is optimized for something other than long-term durability. Owners who prioritize longevity treat the recommended interval as a maximum, not a goal. They change oil earlier, especially if the vehicle sees short trips, heavy traffic, extreme temperatures, or frequent idling. Even if the oil still looks fine, its protective properties may already be compromised. Time matters just as much as mileage because moisture and fuel contamination build up even when the car sits. This is not about fear or paranoia. It is about understanding that oil is the lifeblood of the engine, and once it starts breaking down, everything else follows. Changing it more often is one of the cheapest ways to dramatically extend the life of a Toyota engine. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Many Toyotas that develop oil consumption issues, timing problems, or premature wear did not fail because of bad engineering. They failed because the oil stayed in the engine just a little too long, over and over again, for years. And coming up next is a setting that doesn't just affect oil quality. It actively changes how your drivetrain learns from you, sometimes in ways that make things worse instead of better. Number 4. Toyota's adaptive transmission learning quietly makes things worse over time. Most Toyota owners assume their transmission is a fixed, mechanical system that behaves the same way every time they drive. On modern Toyotas, that is no longer true. Behind the scenes, your transmission is constantly learning from you. Toyota uses adaptive transmission logic that monitors throttle input, braking patterns, vehicle speed, load, and driving conditions, then adjusts shift timing, gear selection, and response to match what it thinks you want. In theory, this makes the car feel smoother and more refined. In reality, it can slowly train the transmission into habits that accelerate wear. Every time you drive, the system is collecting data. Gentle throttle, short trips, heavy traffic, occasional hard acceleration, towing, or highway cruising all feed into this adaptive logic. The problem is that real-world driving is inconsistent. Most vehicles see multiple drivers, mixed conditions, and years of stop-and-go traffic. Over time, the transmission begins blending conflicting inputs into a single behavior pattern, and that is where trouble starts. As the adaptive system compensates, shifts can become delayed, soft, or inconsistent. In some cases, they become harsh. Drivers often describe it as hesitation, gear hunting, or a strange lag followed by a sudden surge. These are not just comfort issues. Each poorly timed shift creates extra heat and shock inside the transmission. Clutches engage less cleanly. Bands and valves work harder. Fluid temperatures rise. Heat is the #1 killer of automatic transmissions. Once heat builds up, the fluid begins to degrade. As fluid breaks down, it loses its ability to cushion shifts and protect internal surfaces. The transmission responds by adapting even more aggressively, trying to correct the behavior with software instead of addressing the root cause. That creates a feedback loop where the transmission slowly hammers itself harder and harder with each correction. Many drivers unknowingly make this worse. When a shift feels lazy or delayed, they push the throttle harder. When it hunts between gears, they manually override it or switch modes. All of that teaches the adaptive system more extreme behaviors, increasing torque loads during shifts and accelerating internal wear. The transmission may still function, but it is working far harder than it needs to. The most deceptive part is that this deterioration happens gradually. There is no sudden failure. The vehicle drives mostly fine, just a little worse each year. By the time a real problem shows up, the internal damage is already done, and repairs become expensive very quickly. Toyota allows the adaptive learning system to be reset on many models, either with a scan tool or through specific relearn procedures. When done correctly, this wipes the learned behavior and forces the transmission to start fresh. But here is the critical part most owners never hear. After a reset, how you drive matters more than ever. Smooth acceleration, consistent throttle input, and gentle shifts during the relearn period help the transmission develop healthier patterns. However, repeatedly resetting the system without addressing old fluid or mechanical wear only masks the issue. It is like rebooting a computer with failing hardware. Eventually, the underlying problem catches up. Toyota transmissions are fundamentally strong, but this adaptive logic can quietly undermine them if left unchecked. Regular fluid changes, even when labeled as lifetime, combined with intentional driving habits, keep the system from learning destructive behaviors. And the final setting we are about to cover is the one almost no owner ever revisits, yet it controls how hard your engine and transmission work every single day you drive. Number 5. Toyota drive modes and hidden settings that quietly overload your powertrain. Modern Toyotas give drivers more control than ever, but that control comes with a catch most owners never realize. Buried in menus and drive mode selectors is a group of settings that directly determine how hard your engine and transmission work every single day. Eco mode, normal, sport, trail, tow, electric vehicle mode, and hybrid-specific drive profiles all sound like harmless preferences. In reality, these modes change throttle response, shift behavior, engine loading, and even how often certain systems activate. The most common mistake Toyota owners make is picking a mode once and never thinking about it again. Eco Mode is a perfect example. It is marketed as the smart, efficient choice, and many drivers enable it the day they buy the car and leave it there for years. What Eco Mode actually does is soften throttle response and encourage the transmission to stay in higher gears at lower engine speed. The engine is constantly encouraged to operate at the bottom of its power band, even when the vehicle would be mechanically happier revving slightly higher. That low engine speed and high load behavior is quiet, but it is not gentle. The engine ends up working harder internally while feeling calmer to the driver. Bearings see higher loads, combustion pressures rise, and the transmission resists downshifting when it should. Over tens of thousands of miles, this constant lugging adds stress that does not show up as a warning light, but absolutely shows up as long-term wear. On the opposite end, Sport Mode creates a different problem. When left on all the time, it raises shift points, holds gears longer, and downshifts aggressively. That keeps the engine at higher engine speed, which means more heat, more friction, and more wear on internal components. It also increases transmission temperature, especially in traffic. Sport Mode is great for short bursts or spirited driving, but when used as a default setting, it slowly accelerates wear without providing any real benefit. Hybrid Toyotas introduce another layer of hybrid complexity. Certain modes increase how often the gasoline engine cycles on and off, while others keep it running longer under load to recharge the battery. When these modes are misused or left in the wrong setting for the driving conditions, the engine and hybrid system can be forced into inefficient, high-stress operating patterns that were not intended for constant use. Some modes also interact with other systems we have already talked about, like automatic stop-start behavior and transmission learning. A mode you selected years ago could be maximizing fuel economy at the cost of mechanical comfort every single time you drive. Owners who care about longevity are deliberate with these settings. They use Eco Mode selectively, not permanently. They reserve Sport Mode for when they actually want it. They choose tow or haul modes when carrying loads, so the transmission does not hunt or lug. And they periodically check their drive mode instead of assuming the car is always operating in the most balanced configuration. This is one of the most overlooked contributors to premature wear because it feels like a preference, not a mechanical decision. But over hundreds of thousands of miles, how your Toyota is configured day in and day out matters just as much as how you maintain it. So now you know. 5 hidden settings that quietly rob Toyotas of the long, reliable life they are famous for. Which one surprised you the most? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you want more Toyota-specific tips that actually help your car reach 300,000 miles and beyond, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss what we are covering next.